All right, it looks like we are ready to go ahead and begin. So I'm going to just jump right in and like to start by welcoming everyone to our Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation Misophonia webinar series. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. We're going to talk about misophonia in 2023, kind of a retrospective year in review. My name is Zach Rosenthal. I'm a psychologist and professor at Duke. I am somebody who lives with someone in my house with misophonia and studies misophonia and helps people with misophonia. And I'm delighted to be here today with others to lead this discussion. If you are joining for the first time and unfamiliar with us, you can find us online at misophonia.duke.edu. You should also feel free to reach out to me at any point. My email is here listed on the screen. It's mark.rosenthal@duke.edu, but please call me Zach. Nobody, not even my family, has ever called me Mark. So please just call me Zach. And if you're an Instagram person, please join our Instagram page at Duke Center for Misophonia. All right, well, welcome again to this webinar. Here's a sort of a visual welcome to you all from our team, our Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation team. I'm so delighted to have this team of people, and we're just really lucky to have the enthusiasm and the energy that this team brings to everything that we do. We do research, we teach and educate and provide clinical services, and really delighted to say we have received some funding recently to increase our advocacy efforts to raise the bar on awareness related to misophonia. So we're doing a lot of things, and we're really excited about everything that we are doing. I'd like to acknowledge a couple of people who are really special partners of ours here that are here with us today. Dr. Jennifer Brout, who, as many of you know, leads the International Misophonia Research Network, is really a dear friend and colleague of mine, and someone who I have long called the maven of misophonia. So welcome to Dr. Brout. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Brout is going to be moderating our Q&A session today as we get to that. I'd like to also acknowledge our colleague and friend Cris Edwards, who is the founder and leader of SoQuiet.org. And if you're new to the Misosphere, one thing you should know is that the term Misosphere was coined by Cris. The Misosphere, the broader global community of people engaged in this work, has in SoQuiet.org an extraordinary resource, really an extraordinary support resource for a nonprofit dedicated to advocacy related to misophonia. So if you don't know SoQuiet, check it out. Also want to thank everyone on my team, our team, and the anonymous families who have generously supported the work we do, including the Brown family, who recently, as I mentioned earlier, has begun to support our work. And thank you to all of you who advocate for people with misophonia, who support the work, and who are dedicated, in whatever way you are dedicated, to improving the lives of people with misophonia. It's been a pretty incredible year, as we're about to talk about. And before I get into it, I want to just mention quickly, if you're new to this kind of a forum, it's really important to honor that people here today are often suffering with misophonia. So we're going to keep everybody's microphones off and ask everyone to keep their camera off, just to kind of minimize distractions and potential triggers, so people can really be focused on what we're talking about. I will do my best not to trigger anyone. I'm really dedicated to that. As I mentioned earlier, I live with misophonia in the house, and so I'm really try very hard to be very focused really on not triggering folks. But if I do, I apologize in advance. Okay, so the structure for today's presentation is going to start as it has, and we're going to then move into a brief overview of what's happening in the field, followed by a very, very non-scientific, extremely non-scientific top 10 advancements for misophonia in the year. So I'm going to highlight scientific discoveries advocacy, and awareness, and talk briefly at the end about what might be coming in 2024, so that a year from now, as we have this conversation, we can maybe look back and see what has happened. So misophonia is really increasing in attention. And one of the key places that we see this is in the media. And we see this online, and we also see this in social media. Here are a couple of headlines and examples of places where misophonia has made it kind of mainstream. You can see some of the sources here. We have Forbes and USA Today, The Guardian. Dr. Brout has her Psychology Today blog, which if you haven't looked into yet, highly recommend that you do. She writes really compelling and interesting pieces about what's happening in the field. So take a look at that. As of today, there are 175 publications ever on misophonia by our count. And here's one way you could organize what these publications are sort of structured as. Majority of them are articles or research articles. You can see kind of a relatively equal minority of papers that are case reports or review papers, or kind of just a hodgepodge of miscellaneous other papers. So 175 total. And if we look back over time at what does this mean in the context of previous years, you can see that in 2023, this last year, we had 57 publications on misophonia, and that compares to 42 the year before, which was really nearly double the year before that, which was nearly double the year before that. So we see this really kind of stepwise increasing number of publications each year, starting really in 2021, 2 years ago. And it's fascinating. Look at this, 33% of all publications, 1/3 of all publications ever on misophonia were published in 2023. That's a big deal. That tells me 2023 was an important year in the science and publications about misophonia. We also can look at Google searches as just sort of an indicator of how often are people looking for information about misophonia online. And if we looked here in the US, we can see it's roughly between 1,000 to 2,000 searches per month in the last year. So let's see if we can, a year from now, look at this slide and see if things have increased. And I'm hoping we can all do our work to kind of increase this. So we're getting the word out and getting more and more people to really be actively searching for misophonia. All right, now I'm going to shift right into our top 10, and I'm going to just do this the best I can and kind of go backwards in order, and hopefully there's a little bit of suspense to the number one. Again, this is non-scientific. There are so many things that advanced in the last year that I had a really hard time coming up with a top 10 and not a top 15 or 20 or 25, but we've got our top 10. So let's start with number 10, which is new recognizable names and faces openly talked about having misophonia. So we saw in 2023 some new names and faces. And, you know, for people who have been engaged in this work for a long time, like myself, there's kind of just been, I think, a steady, the same people, more or less, celebrities and familiar kind of names or faces with misophonia have been listed online for a long time now, for a number of years. But last year we had some new names and faces. Lisa Loeb, the singer, is not new to announcing she had misophonia, but I wanted to highlight that she did come on to Adil Ahmad's fabulous podcast called the Misophonia Podcast in 2023 and talk about her experience in depth. So that's something to look into if you haven't yet. On the bottom right, Linda Evangelista is a celebrity model who, towards the end of the year, here you can see in the Los Angeles Times, was noted as highlighting how she isn't dating for many reasons, including, quote, "I don't want to hear somebody breathing," talking about having misophonia. And then just recently, I think maybe even in the last week or two, a woman named Alex Earle, who is very, very well known in the social media world, and the Gen Z social media world in particular, with 6 million or something followers. She put a video out on TikTok saying that she has misophonia. So that's a big deal when somebody with 6 million followers puts a name to their experience of misophonia. That's a big deal. That really can help increase awareness and visibility and really help people feel like they're not the only one who's struggling with this. So there may be others as well. This isn't intended to be a full comprehensive list, but just to say that's part of the work is we need recognizable names and faces out there talking about misophonia and their experience. That will help us all by increasing visibility. Number 9, SoQuiet.org in 2023 launched new peer support groups. And again, I mentioned SoQuiet.org earlier, but if you're not familiar with SoQuiet's peer support groups, I would highly encourage you to check them out. Go to SoQuiet.org online. You can do it right now if you want. And you can see here under their resources tab that they describe the misophonia peer support groups. These are peer-led misophonia support groups. This is free. There's really not a charge. It's not someone like me who's a scientist and a clinician or a psychologist trying to provide treatment. It's really peer-driven in a way that's structured, that's organized. The peer support leaders are all trained in a standardized, structured training. So it's hopefully something that many people are beginning to find valuable. Number 8, more research in 2023 is finding that there's an interesting thing we see when we study misophonia in that trigger sounds can generate a lower reaction when the trigger sound is generated by some other source visually that's plausible, but is not what would be typically expected to be the source. This is a little tricky, and I don't want to trigger anybody, so potential kind of trigger warning with discussing these studies. But in these studies, what we're finding, and various researchers have found this slide here will show one example of a study in 2023 that Marta Siepsiak and her colleagues in Poland did. And what they found in this study is that the context in which the trigger cue occurs in influences how strongly somebody reacts to the trigger cue. So if we were to show people with misophonia triggers happening in the way that would be expected. So again, trigger warning here, but imagine that, someone's eating and that's a trigger for you. And you saw someone eating on a video and you heard the trigger sound of someone eating. Well, that would be expected to elicit a strong response, a strong physical response, a physiologic response, an emotional response, a cognitive response, et cetera, et cetera. It would elicit a strong, or it should elicit a strong multimodal type of response. What's interesting in these studies done by Siepsiak and others is that if you show the same trigger sound, but it's not someone eating, instead it's an alternative visual cause of the same exact sound, what you get is a lower reaction. So this multimodal type of response, emotionally, cognitively, physiologically, it may be smaller when the brain sees a source of the sound that is plausible, but is not the actual expected trigger sound. So that's interesting because one of the things it tells us is that it isn't just the sounds themselves, it's really the sound of a trigger in a context, a visual multisensory context. That multisensory context is the context that all people with misophonia are triggered in. It's not just a sound in a vacuum. And so if the context and the way in which we perceive a trigger sound impacts our response, it tells scientists and clinicians that maybe there's a way to leverage that. Maybe there's a way to help people, right? Maybe there's a way to figure out how can we develop interventions, how can we develop and test treatments that can help people, if they are unfortunately triggered, to be able to experience that trigger in a way where they're maybe imagining, or maybe they're reappraising, or maybe there's technology used to help them see or experience the trigger in a different visual context. So we'll talk some about that in a little bit at the end of the webinar. But in my mind, this is a really promising potential avenue into developing interventions. Okay, number 7, an important study done in the UK found that there's a very high prevalence of misophonia symptoms in the UK. And prevalence of misophonia it's a challenging topic to talk about because the prevalence of misophonia, the true global prevalence, is really not known. And I say that as a sort of scientist that we don't actually know. What we have now are a number of different studies using different methodologies, some honestly not so rigorous, and some pretty rigorous, and some in between. And these different methodologies are telling us kind of different stories about the prevalence level. So anytime we have a prevalence study across a country that uses what's called representative sampling, where they sample the public in a representative way, anytime we have that, it's automatically kind of elevated to a more rigorous type of study. That's just it's a hard thing to do, and it's an expensive thing to do. It takes time and resources to do that kind of study well. And when the folks in the UK who did this study, so this would be Dr. Celia Vittoratu and her colleagues, excuse me, Celia Vittoratu, that is how you say her name. My apologies, Celia, if you're here. When they did this study, what they did was got a representative type of sample across the UK. And again, that's really hard. That's not simple to do. And applied a measure of misophonia that is really, I think, arguably the most validated, psychometrically speaking, measure of misophonia symptoms in the world. And that's called the S5. And the S5 is a 25-item self-report measure that assesses the severity of misophonia on 5 different dimensions. And this measure is really kind of easy to administer. It's short to do. It's not comprehensive. It doesn't measure anything and everything, but what it does is measure a lot of the parts of misophonia and in a pretty short 25-item way. What they did was use this measure to estimate what is likely an approximation of prevalence in the UK. And the bold here shows you their finding. The kind of takeaway here is roughly an estimated, through extrapolation from their data, they roughly estimate about an 18% prevalence rate. That's really high. I mean, if you think about it, 18% of the population is a lot of people. So it's worth thinking about, can we replicate studies that use a representative sampling to randomly sample populations? And can we, would we see if we did that in other countries as high of a rate of misophonia? I'm not sure, because some of the other studies in other countries that did representative sampling didn't find anything quite that high. Nonetheless, this I think is a really powerful and important study to highlight in the last year. It got a lot of attention in the news media, and for good reason. 18% is a big number. Number 6, increasing amount of research on misophonia was done in 2023 in kids and teens. And I mean, go figure. Misophonia, as far as we know, for most people, seems to begin in childhood or in adolescence. We don't truly know, again, as a scientist, I'd say we don't really truly know, because no one has done longitudinal developmental studies to document over time when and how people develop and respond to misophonia onset. But as far as we can tell from the science that exists, it does look like most people report it beginning during their childhood or teen years. So we need studies. We need studies of misophonia in kids and teens. And last year we got some. And I can't, again, I don't have all the time in the world, so I can't call out and highlight all of the great work everyone did. But I would bring attention to this particular study done by Dr. Andrew Guzik and his colleagues at Baylor. And this study is a study of 102 kids. And what I really like about this study and why I'm highlighting it is that they used structured diagnostic assessments to evaluate and diagnose these youth. And why that matters is because it's hard to do. It takes a long time, and it has to be supported by research funding to do, because it just takes a long time to do this. It can take hours and hours to really, per person, carefully diagnose psychiatric disorders, carefully diagnose mental health problems. It's a much more involved process than simply, giving somebody a survey and asking them, do they have this diagnosis or have they ever had it? That's not exactly a very rigorous way to study things like this. So I love that this team took the harder route and really did the right kind of work to carefully look at this. And you can see on the far right side, their findings that are, I think, maybe most important to highlight are that the highest co-occurring psychiatric problems or mental health problems were anxiety disorders and mood disorders. And this is consistent with a couple of other larger and more rigorous studies, including one done by our group in the year before, showing that when we look at mental health problems in misophonia, we might expect that the highest kind of co-occurring rate would be with anxiety and or mood disorders. And that's when we look at it using kind of carefully done, rigorously applied psychiatric interviews, as opposed to just asking people in a survey. So great work by this team in this study. And just a call out, if anybody's here who's doing research on misophonia, let's see what we can do this next year to increase research done with kids and teens. Number 5, as many of you know, earlier in the year, at the beginning of 2023, the first study investigating the role of genetics in misophonia was published. And we get asked all the time here at the Duke Center, what about the genetics? Is there a genetic underpinning? Is there a genetic contribution to misophonia? It's one of the top things people will email us about, and they'll say, I have misophonia, someone in my family has it. Do you think it's genetic? And the truth is, we don't really know. We don't really know. And this study also doesn't give us a kind of final answer to it, but it is the first study to begin looking at this. And what these folks did at Amsterdam Medical Center is they took the 23andMe data, which is a large data set, genetic data set, and they were able to get that data and look at how people responded to a single item about rage-related responses to other people eating. So this is just one item. It's not a full measure of misophonia, but it is, we got to admit, it's pretty darn relevant to misophonia, rage experienced when seeing other people eat. So that single item in the 23andMe data set was essentially able to be used to identify a type of possible genetic target that could be a correlate of misophonia. And then what they did was they took that kind of genetic correlate from the 23andMe database and they compared that to what is seen in other large biobanks, other large databases that they had access to, that had lots of other information about people, about mental health and physical health problems. So what they ended up finding here on the right side of the screen, again, this is preliminary, it's a first step, not a final conclusion, but still really important, is that there really weren't any genetic correlations with ADHD or OCD or psychotic disorders. They didn't observe any sort of genetics of misophonia, preliminary genetics related to ADHD or OCD or psychosis, which may be surprising to some people. And again, this is just a first study, so it's not a final conclusion, but they didn't find any genetic relationship there. They also found, interestingly, an inverse or negative genetic relationship with autism spectrum disorder and misophonia, where the more that you had this, the more, how to say it, the more autism spectrum disorder, the less the genetic underpinning of misophonia. So not what a lot of people might expect, but it's what they found, that there was an opposite relationship there. not only no relationship, but an opposite negative genetic correlation. So where they found their strongest genetic correlations were with tinnitus, so ringing in the ears, depression, PTSD, an anxiety disorder called generalized anxiety disorder, and then with a couple of sets of personality traits, guilt/neuroticism being one trait that they identified, and then irritability and kind of /sensitivity. So these are things that they found as being correlated with this genetic polymorphism. So their takeaway here is that the genetics of misophonia, in a very preliminary way, seem most strongly associated with psychiatric disorders, and even more specifically with anxiety disorders and possibly PTSD. This, again, first study, preliminary, I've said that a half a dozen times, but it's still an important first step. Okay, moving on to number 4. The first study was done in 2023 to determine, in a snapshot of time, how aware, in the United States at least, how aware the public is of what misophonia is. So population level awareness is critical. And the reason it's, I think, critical is that we need to know what our baseline level of awareness is in order to then see if we're increasing awareness. If we're doing all the things we're all doing together in the mesosphere to try to change things for the better, one would hope that we would see awareness go up, right? It shouldn't go down. It should only go up. So this study done in this last year by Dr. Dixon and her colleagues found that 11% of the US population recognizes the term misophonia. So 11%. So you could look at this as, wow, that's only 11%. Oh my gosh, we have so much more work to do. Or you could look at it as, wow, we already have 11% of the country aware of this. So it depends how you can look at this as a glass half empty or half full. I choose to look at it as this is baseline. This is a baseline. And so now we have a place to move from to see if what we're doing changes things. And I love this study because, again, like the previous study I talked about, it uses representative sampling. So this is a kind of a reasonably representative large sample that represents the US. It's not a skewed sample. It's not, a convenient sample. It's not undergraduates. It's not, people who came into this or that clinic. It's a very expensive study to do because you have to hire people who can get access to a good random sampling and representative sampling of the US. So congrats to Dr. Dixon and her team for this awesome work. And I should say this study and several of the studies that I've mentioned here were funded by the Misophonia Research Fund, which is a part of the Ream Foundation. So thank you to them for funding this work. Okay, number 3. Number 3 in our top 10 advancements for misophonia in the last year, the first special section on misophonia was completed, and the ebook for all of the articles is now online and it's free. So this is a PDF that anybody can go access. You can download it. And I got to warn you, if you do, it's like pretty big. It's about 300 to 400 pages. So it's a big PDF. It will be something that will no doubt take a while to read. But this is a big deal because there's never been up until now in any scientific journal, any special section, any collection of articles on misophonia. And this is the first time that that's happened, and it was completed last year. You can see this is kind of, if you go online here's the link. If you are online right now and you just want to type into your search term frontiers, special section, misophonia, you'll find this pretty quickly. And you can see we've got here from this snapshot, I took this picture the other day, so this is recent. This special section has been viewed 93,000 times with 17,000 downloads. 17,000 downloads. That's a lot. There's a lot of downloads to have. So in my mind, that's a pretty important contribution in the last year. And if you're unfamiliar with the special section, there's 24 articles, and most of these are original empirical studies done to kind of help us better understand the nature of misophonia and kind of what we can expect are core features of misophonia. And there's really a lot of different types of studies on here. There's also several review papers in here. So if you're new to misophonia and you just kind of want to, kind of get your head wrapped around what is it and what do we know about it, this is a great place to start as well. Okay, so moving along from number 3 to number 2, in 2023, we had an event, an all-day event called Conversations About Research with Everyone, which I have to admit I named in a very hokey way, but I'll take it. It ended up working out fine. We call it Care Day. So Care Day 2023 had about 780 plus people attend that day, and many more have watched the videos that are posted for free online since. I don't know if this is the largest ever event for the public for misophonia, but I think it might be. It's almost 800 people. That's quite a lot of people. And this is the first time we'd ever done this. And I should say we at Duke, in partnership with SoQuiet.org and with Dr. Brout, the International Misophonia Research Network. We, as the three of us, kind of co-producing this in partnership with advocacy leaders throughout the world who care deeply about misophonia. So again, this was a free event. What we had were speakers that were nominated by the advocacy leaders and approached and invited to participate. And these speakers did an incredible job talking about their work and doing it in a way that was designed for the public. So not really designed to be like for a bunch of scientists nerding out at a conference together in sort of nerdy scientific ways. We tried to help people be free of jargon and just kind of talk about their work in a way that was just really kind of down to earth, practical, and hopefully inspirational for people around the world. That was the intention, and that's what we hope happened. For what it's worth, if this is something that sounds exciting to you, go ahead and save the date, because we're going to have Care Day 2. This is the first time kind of announcing this, but we're going to have the second year of Care Day, and it will be this year on April 30th, 2024. And you'll see more about that as we kind of put our marketing and social media and such material out there. You'll hear much more about it, but go ahead and mark your date now. It'll be April 30th. Also, if you haven't seen these videos, they're posted. They're free. Cris Edwards has them up and posted on the SoQuiet page, and you can watch them anytime. And I have to say, Cris just did an extraordinary job. Cris and his team did an incredible job at making these slick and really beautiful to look at. And just kudos to Cris and to SoQuiet. Okay, and in my opinion, the number one advancement for misophonia research in 2023 has to be that the Misophonia Research Fund surpassed $10 million funding given worldwide to support misophonia research. If you're unfamiliar with the Misophonia Research Fund, this is the only entity in the world specifically dedicated to funding research around the world on misophonia. And the Misophonia Research Fund started several years ago. This is not an old foundation or fund. This is only a 5-year-old organization. And what they've done is extraordinary. It is nothing short of extraordinary, in my opinion. $10 million given to people around the world to study misophonia. And you saw earlier in this presentation, the graph, you saw what it looked like, how we see increasing research and increasing publications. I think we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to the Misophonia Research Fund for being the inspiration and probably a principal driver or cause of that increase in awareness and increase in science. The science is expensive. Science costs money. To do this, any of the stuff that any of us do, it costs a lot of money. That's just the reality. And unfortunately, it kind of is proportionate to the kind of the importance of the question. A lot of times the more challenging, vexing questions that people want answers to, they just can cost more. They just take more time to do. So again, thank you to the Misophonia Research Fund. And for those of you who are here today who are researchers, thank you for the work you're doing to continue to advance the knowledge about misophonia through the MRF as well as through other funding sources. Okay, so that's my top 10. That's the Duke CMER top 10 for the year. And apologies if there's something I left out that you think is really important. I'm sure if you include it in the chat, I'm very likely to agree with you. There are many, many, many important things that happen. And, you know, if I look ahead to 2024, here are some things I think we might expect. And some of these things I know are going to happen. And some of them are guesses. The first prevalence study in the US using a representative sample, Dr. Dixon and her colleagues, I think we're going to see, I hope we're going to see that paper out sometime this year. We're also going to see some new neuroimaging studies published. And I know because some of this work is being done at Duke by my colleague, Dr. Andrada Nekshu, I know that we're going to see a new neuroimaging study, and we're going to see a study showing that neurostimulation is a potential target, not a cure, not a treatment, we're not there yet, but a potential target to explore for helping people with misophonia. There's going to be more research on kids and teens, and the folks at Sussex, at the University of Sussex in the UK, are some of the leaders in the world on this work. It's Dr. Joel Simner and Dr. Jamie Ward and their colleagues are just doing incredible work on kids and teens. And they and others, I think we can expect to do much more of this in 2024. We're going to see new treatment studies published. We've got a study that is accepted that you'll see in the coming weeks using the unified protocol for adults with misophonia. I should say, not definitive, not the final answer, but a new treatment study suggesting promise for an approach to help people. And I know we're not alone. There's others that are doing this work, and we can expect to see more publications on treatment in this year. I mentioned Care Day 2024, where we already talked about that, save the date for April 30th. That's going to happen. We're also going to see in 2024 increased efforts towards advocacy and awareness of misophonia. And I'm putting a little teaser in there that we have a collaboration here at Duke with a celebrity with misophonia. And I'm teasing, not announcing their name yet, because we're going to be putting out some videos soon in the coming months that will be with this celebrity announcing that they have misophonia, and really just in the effort of trying to raise awareness and advocacy for misophonia. And as I mentioned also earlier at Duke, I know that we're going to be doing work. I don't think we're the only ones. I'm sure we're not the only ones. I'm sure there's others, many people around the world. I can speak for certainty to what we're going to do. And I know because we have some new funding that we're going to be increasing the work we do towards awareness and advocacy. One of the things that we want to do is we want anyone to go to see their doctor or their clinical provider and mention the word misophonia. And we want that doctor or clinical provider to know the word. We want them to know that misophonia is a thing. It's a real thing. It exists. People struggle with it. And it's not something that they should just be, sort of writing off as the patient is being manipulative, or the patient is making this up, or it's the patient's fault, or this or that. We want people to be taken seriously, and we want to raise awareness to make that happen. In addition, we are going to see an emphasis on stakeholder feedback in misophonia research. So one of the things we're doing is we're going to be providing focus groups for the research that we do, where we're inviting people who have an interest in misophonia to tell us what we should be doing, tell us what our studies should be about, and help us when we do have a study idea, kind of help us shape up our study ideas to be the best possible studies they can be through your input. That's something we're doing at Duke this year, and I'll speak about that in just a minute even more. And then lastly on this slide, I think we can expect to see in 2024 an increased emphasis on clinician training and an expansion of access to care with a growing provider directory. And So Quiet is going to lead the way in this, and is going to need the partnership with a lot of others to make this really succeed. one of the most important things we can do as a community is get more people to know about misophonia, and that includes our providers. And as they learn about it, we have to train them, at least minimally, to know what it is, how to assess it, and at least how to think about talking to people and supporting people. There's no evidence-based intervention. There's no cure, but that doesn't mean we can't help people, right? That doesn't mean that people have to wait until there's a cure or wait until there's the gold standard treatment. We have to help people now. We have to help clinicians and providers know what they can know to be helpful as best as possible right now.
Zach, may I interrupt you?
Please do.
Just wanted to say this might be a great time to mention that along with So Quiet, we're building a class for clinicians so that while we won't necessarily be endorsing clinicians, we will at least be able to ensure there's a certain criterion that they have met in terms of taking a class.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, so this is not anybody and everybody. This is a kind of a clinician training that Dr. Brout and others are helping to kind of put together to help then provide that minimal baseline amount of education for providers to then be able to say, yeah, we trust that we can tell you, go see this doc, go see this provider, and they at least have had some kind of reasonable minimal background education in misophonia. Okay, so thank you to everyone. I'm going to shift gears here in just a second to our Q&A portion of today. Before I do, just a highlight here for those who are interested in coming to our next webinar. These are always free, and we're going to have Dr. Jamie Ward from the University of Sussex, who's going to be presenting on sensory sensitivity in misophonia and trying to help us figure out what does that mean and what parts are sort of general and what parts are more specific to misophonia. And then I mentioned a minute ago that we at Duke are doing focus groups. We have a focus group if anyone is interested in being in our focus group. We are having one January 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're looking for a group of people to help shape up our ideas about a future study that we're planning using augmented reality to help people experience when they unfortunately are triggered, to see if augmented reality can help change and make much more tolerable, much better the experience when they are triggered. So we're trying to essentially figure out a good study to do that, and we'd love your feedback. psychcmer@dm.duke.edu is the email, so send an email to that email address and let us know if you're interested. We're going to be doing this for all of our future studies, so if you're not in this first focus group, there'll be other ones coming. On the right side of the screen is an invitation to you all to attend Dr. Brout's misophonia workshop. This is for parents of kids with misophonia, and you can see the information there. And you go online to jb@drjenniferbrout.com to get more information and to register. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing screen here and open up. Jen, I have not seen anything on the chat, so I'm going to turn this over to you and let you lead the Q&A.
We forgot to tell people they could ask questions in the chat in the beginning. So
my apologies.
Sorry about that. Usually we encourage people to ask questions as we're going along, and then I can try to answer some of them. But in any case, here's what we've got so far. Jenna, who you may remember is an audiologist at Nemours Hospital, is asking about measures, I'm assuming, Jenna, that you can use for children. I guess the S5, is that available online? And what other measures might she use? Oh, and Cris gave her the link. Okay, but maybe you could respond to the idea of what other measures she could use for children.
So Jenna, great question, and hi, good to have you here. It's good to be with you again. There's been less development of measures for kids than there has been for measures of adults. So it's true, if we were to rewind back a few years ago, there were really not any well-developed, psychometrically speaking, measures of misophonia. They were kind of just the first wave of new measures that were good first starts, but hadn't really been rigorously evaluated. In the last couple of years, there's now, I'd say last 3 years, there's been, by my count, about 5 or 6 newly built, validated measures of misophonia. And really all of them have been for adults, not kids, and they vary on what they target. So the measures for kids are a little bit less psychometrically validated, but there is a recent study looking at a misophonia questionnaire done by the group at Baylor. I believe the first author's last name is spelled Cervin. I believe that's the first author of the paper. And so you can go to Google Scholar and you can look up CERVIN, misophonia children, and you'll see the measure. And you can kind of read to see whether you think that that was a reasonable measure to use. I know that Dr. CMER and her colleagues at the University of Sussex are also working to validate measures for kids. And they have a measure that they've got some very early validation data on with teens with misophonia. So you can also go to their website. They're trying to remember exactly. If anybody from their group is here today, you can drop in the chat the link. I think it's misophonia-hub.org, maybe. Maybe Lisa or Emily, you could look that up and drop it in. But they have a hub, an online hub of resources through Dr. Simner's group, and that's where you could find that measure.
Okay. This is a statement. Guys, I hope you understand how traumatizing it is going to be to test us for trigger sounds, whether it's in virtual reality or real time. So maybe that's something you want to address, Zach.
It's really hard. Thank you for that comment. It's really, really challenging to understand a phenomenon that's very real and very painful and very hard for people, and try to figure out how to make sense of it and how to help people with it. It's very hard to do without scientifically understanding what happens when people experience the phenomenon. It's a really hard conundrum to struggle with. So it's really true that if you're somebody who has misophonia and you believe that participating in a study is something that would be traumatizing, I would encourage you, not to do the study. Nobody on the science side wants to traumatize anybody. I mean, none of us want to traumatize anyone. I love people with misophonia. I have them in my family. I care about this deeply. The last thing that I know I want to do, and I think this is true for anybody who studies this, is traumatize someone. So please don't participate if you believe you'll be traumatized. Being upset, being triggered, that is part of the phenomenon. And so it's really true that for us to be able to understand it, one of the ways to understand it is to try to see what happens when people are triggered, to figure out how we can change what happens. And that does mean, to some extent, at least in some studies, providing the cues that elicit a reaction so we can understand what it is. It's not really enough from a scientific perspective to just ask people to tell us what happens. We can do that, but we also want to make this more legitimate, more understood, and ultimately to develop treatments so we can prove that we're able to help change responses. We do need to measure responses. I really appreciate the comment, though.
Thanks, Zach. Mercedes asked a great question. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, Mercedes.
Now I've lost it, but what her question addressed is, are we now not thinking of this as an auditory disorder, but a more complex disorder? And if so, could you explain?
That's an awesome question.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Mercedes, that's a great question. And Jen and or Chris, feel free to jump in on this or any of these questions. One thing that needs to be kind of said, I think, as clearly as possible, is that misophonia is not under the purview of any particular discipline. Like, it doesn't really matter what someone's opinion is, my opinion, or maybe somebody posts something on social media and they say it's a this disorder or it's a that disorder. The truth is that we don't actually know, and there isn't a discipline that owns misophonia, right? Like it's not an auditory disorder owned by the audiologists. It's not a neurological disorder owned by the neurologists. It's not a psychiatric disorder owned by the psychiatrists or the mental health people. It's not really clear what it is yet. So anybody who says it definitively is this type of disorder or that, it's really just their opinion. It's not actually true. It's just their opinion, and opinions are important, but they shouldn't be confused with, kind of a capital T truth. So the way that I at least think about this is that misophonia sits at kind of the intersection, overlapping with a couple of different disciplines, at least. Audiology is one of them. Occupational therapy is another one. Mental health broadly is another. But that doesn't mean that misophonia is a mental health disorder or is an OT disorder or is an audiologic disorder. I think, Mercedes, you're right. It's complicated. I think you're exactly right. It's a complicated, and we've only been doing science on misophonia for around 10 years. And you saw the graph earlier, the science is just starting to take off. So I think we don't quite know yet. I think that's just a reality, and people wanting to lump it or, kind of categorize it as this disorder or that disorder. It's just that. It's just what people are wanting. It's their opinion, but it's not necessarily true. It's a little premature.
Thanks, Zach. I just want to add to that I think this is one of the things that is so confusing to all of us with misophonia and to professionals working with people with misophonia. Part of the problem is that, and this is so true of so many medical disorders, nothing really exists in isolation in terms of really brain function, physiology, emotional. It's all intertwined. So the categories themselves, for the most part, are somewhat fabricated and false. So trying to find the right category that subsumes everything about misophonia is very difficult. And I think one of the things that So Quiet is making an effort to do is help from the, I don't want to say patient perspective, but voice of the sufferer, really try to have our voices heard so that people understand when you use the word emotional, well, what does that mean to us? When you use the word neurological, what does that mean to us? So the more people who can get involved in, even just emailing people and just, saying that I'm confused, what do you mean emotional versus neuropsychological? So it's very good to advocate and just let your voices be heard, because the confusion is real. It's not just with this disorder. Okay. And then I also wanted to say, we have a question from Carrie Walker. Does a technology exist for talking on the phone to someone with misophonia in which the triggering person is morphed in real time so as not to trigger the person with misophonia?
No, there's nothing like that. But it's a really interesting kind of cutting edge idea. But there isn't anything that exists today like that.
Okay, another question. Okay, this is from Janice Neese, who is a psychologist. I am a psychologist working with an 11-year-old male and feel very lost. Since exposure is definitely not recommended, should we focus on emotional regulation skills? And then there's a second part to the question. Also, what diagnosis are people using since misophonia is not in the DSM-5?
Well, the diagnoses that I can just speak to myself at Duke, when I do the patient, I don't do work with kids. I'm not a trained child psychologist, so I can only speak to work with adults. When I do evaluations with adults, um, I'm always looking to try to understand holistically what are the possible problems that might exist, and I'm qualified to assess. And so I'm a psychologist, so I'm looking mostly at the psychological problems. And what I find at Duke is that the majority of my patients I evaluate do have some other co-occurring, there is some sort of diagnosable something. Now, not everybody. And when there is no other diagnosable problem, I'll enter a diagnostic code for psychosocial stressor or anger reaction. Those are Z codes. They're able to be used for billing purposes. Now, whether an insurance payer pays for that or not is a different question. To my knowledge, we haven't had any challenges with getting paid for that when I've had that diagnosis. But in terms of DSM-5 kind of disorder diagnoses as opposed to Z codes, yeah, mostly what I think, if I look in hindsight, most of what I see are probably anxiety-related problems or mood-related problems. Those are probably the most common co-occurring problems.
And
And the other part of the question, sorry.
yeah, sorry, the other part of the question, Zach, was as a psychologist, she feels very frustrated and confused as to what to do. If she can't do exposure therapy, what should she do? Should she work on emotional regulation?
Yeah.
What should she be working?
Yes.
An 11-year-old.
Yes, of course, of course. And again, not a child psychologist, but I will say broadly and generally, conventional exposure therapy is not indicated for misophonia. Conventional habituation-based exposure therapy is not something that we recommend. It's not something I've ever seen a patient ask for or want. I've only heard patients talk about horror stories of therapists who have insisted that this be done. And they come to Duke and they say, please don't do this. We will not do this. We will not do that. That's not what we're going to do. So I would encourage clinicians, please don't do that. But don't equate that as meaning you can't do anything. Exposure-based therapy it may be a hammer, but that doesn't mean it's the only tool that a therapist has. Remember, misophonia is not known to be a particular psychiatric disorder. It's not OCD. It's not an anxiety disorder, right? So providing a treatment that is for those disorders, kind of like, insisting that everything you see is a nail because you've got a hammer. So definitely don't do that. Don't do that. Now, what do you do? Well, we would recommend, and we're running short of time, but a broad way to think about it, and you're free to contact me after, and I'm happy to spend an hour with you and kind of take all the time to talk this through with you. That's true for anybody who's here who wants time to talk through what to do. A multidisciplinary approach where it's not all on you, the therapist. It's really thinking about, from a multidisciplinary strategy, what might an OT say from a sensory responsivity perspective? Let's see what they have to say. They have training. And by the way, the OTs are the people in the healthcare world that are the experts in sensory, not mental health. That's not what we do. We are not the experts in sensory related problems, but the OTs are. So engaging an OT for an evaluation, for treatment recommendations, engaging an audiologist for evaluation and treatment recommendations, and then thinking about what are some evidence-based strategies that are transdiagnostic broadly, which include emotion regulation and coping and all sorts of things we could lump under coping strategies that have transdiagnostic evidence that work for lots and lots and lots of people with lots and lots and lots of different diagnostic names. That's a really short answer to the question, but that's a starting point.
I'll add, since I am a child psychologist, and I also have raised a grown-up now who was a child with misophonia, and I also have misophonia, for those of you who don't know me. And I think, as it is very frustrating when you are working with children, and I think what you need to go in with the idea that I can't fix this and not claim to be able to fix it, or I don't know, depends on what wording you want to use, but you can say, I can make this better for you. And when you talk about self-regulation, the important part is to bring in, let's say, the occupational therapist, if you're not familiar with any of the sensory, if you haven't gone through OT yourself, to say what is going to be the most self-regulating in a physiological sense for this individual. You also include cognitive. You also include practical strategies. It's really almost like you have to, there's no one thing to do for each person. You need to come up as really the case manager, if you're willing to take that role, with a combination of these different facets of cross-disciplinary work that will work. And you have to put it together and help the family. I also think working with the family is very helpful, because when you're working with an 11-year-old, what the family does and doesn't do and how they cope is also really important. So I just wanted to add that. And one other thing, the thing that you will have the most difficulty with is the in the moment. You can help somebody with self-regulation. It's what do you do in that moment? And that's the tricky part. That's a whole nother webinar. So another question is Lisa, you pointed out an important question. I know I can't find it. If you would explain the unified protocol, I think it was.
Mhm.
I think, yeah. Oh, here, could you please explain more about the transdiagnostic approach and the unified protocol that you're doing it to?
Sure. And I think I will make this be our last recorded question. Emily, you can stop the recording after this answer, and then we can stick around for anybody who can for additional questions for a few more minutes. But in short, so the unified protocol is a evidence-based therapy, psychotherapy, that has been around now for about 15 years, and it's been tested and shown to help people with a wide range of kind of mental health diagnoses. So we call it transdiagnostic because it helps people across lots of diagnoses. It's not a treatment for, it's not a specific treatment for a specific disorder. It's really a treatment that can be used for a lot of different people. So our group took that unified protocol. It's a 16-week structured therapy. We took it, we adapted it to misophonia, and we tested to see, does it seem acceptable? Does it seem feasible? And does it look like it might be helpful? What we didn't do is get a definitive answer that it is helpful, but we did ask those preliminary questions. And it is feasible and it is acceptable. And it does look like for many people, it is promising, shall we say, promising as a potential treatment. So it's 16 weeks, it's structured. It's kind of like if you think about the essential oils of what works from an evidence base across psychotherapies. If you distilled, this is basically what they did when they built it, was they took 30 years of psychotherapy research and they distilled down to get kind of to those essential oils of what works across a lot of treatments, not all, but most. And then what they did was built this manualized approach that has core modules, like core chunks of things that are those main ingredients of the things that work for most people in most treatment studies over many decades. And so those components are built in. I will say it's a cognitive behavioral type of approach, but it's more of like a new wave cognitive behavioral approach. It's not, it's not your father's or mother's CBT. It's not the thing that is a cartoon caricature of CBT. It's really a more modern way of doing things, where there's a focus on emotion and a focus on mindfulness and learning to experience yourself and your emotional reactions in a new way, and learning to kind of tolerate emotions and experience emotions and regulate emotions, as well as learning how to think differently and make sense of situations in a different way, as well as learning how to approach and not avoid situations that are kind of emotionally evocative. So sorry, that's a quick kind of overview of it, but that's kind of the gist of it.